Today's date is August 2nd, 2013. This is an oral history interview being conducted under the Schoodic Institute at Acadia National Park. The interviewee is Meredith Sandstrom and the interviewer is Jasper Sheehan. This interview is being conducted at the Schoodic Education and Research Center. Please state your full name and present address.
My name is Meredith Young Sandstrom, and my address is 193 Peninsula Road, Gouldsboro, Maine, 04607.
How long have you lived at your present home? Where and when were you born?
I've lived at my present home since August of 1984, and I was born in Rochester, New York in 1961.
So you lived in Rochester as a child?
Yes, I did. I lived there until I graduated high school, and then I went directly into the Navy.
So what can you recall about your family home and hometown?
It was a wonderful place to grow up. We had a very large neighborhood, and all the families were there for my entire childhood. And 3 of the families had 6 children, and we were one of the families with 6 children. So it was a wonderful environment to grow up in. And it was really, truly God's country. But coming from a big family, my parents really didn't have the money to put us all through college, and my father was a military man, and I followed a sister that was in the first class of women at West Point. So I decided that I was going to go into the service as well, and I chose the Navy.
So what circumstances were you under when you enlisted in the Navy?
I was, an 18-year-old young woman that needed a direction to go in my life, and I really just thought that the Navy would be a good opportunity for me.
Where were you living at the time?
I was still living at home in Rochester, New York.
What were your first days in the service like?
The typical boot camp experience where all the men had their heads shaved and all of a sudden you're cast into a unit with, I was down in Orlando, Florida, and there was 80 women in our company. So it was a big culture shock and an adjustment because all of a sudden you have 79 sisters you're sharing a room with. And, going through all the medical processes, getting our shots, getting our uniforms issued, starting to go into classrooms and learning the basics about military service and everything, and just like everybody else went through.
Did you ever feel uncomfortable as a woman in the Navy?
There were some incidences that were very uncomfortable over the years that happened to me, but for the most part it was a wonderful experience.
Tell me more about your boot camp and training experiences and how you got through with it.
Well, because of the rate that I chose, in the beginning, before everybody determines what direction, what field they're going to go into, everybody's getting the basic training. And I'll never forget, one instructor was teaching us how to paint, because that was basic seamanship skills. And he was telling us, it's very simple. You just lay it on and lay it off. Lay it on and lay it off when he was demonstrating with the paintbrush. So, we had to learn all different kinds of skills, and the biggest thing was paying attention to detail. Because if you're on board a ship in the middle of the night and that ship gets hit and starts to sink, you need to be able to, in an instant, grab what you need and put it on. So a lot of people had probably some trouble understanding some of the basic principles of why we had to learn the things that we did. But it was all about safety. So it was very meticulous. We had to fold our clothing a certain way and stow it in our lockers a certain way. And, we learned how to polish our boots and drill instruction and just a lot of stuff that we learned in boot camp.
Do you remember your instructors? And if so, can you tell me anything about them and what it was like serving under them?
Yes, I do indeed. Petty Officer Sparks and Petty Officer Sprague, and we were the first female unit that had a male company commander as well as a female company commander. So they were scary.
How many duty stations had you served at before getting assigned to NSGA Winter Harbor?
Just one, Roosevelt Roads, Puerto Rico.
What was your rate and rank when you got to NSGA Winter Harbor?
I had just made 3rd class bosun's mate. So I was an E4 bosun's mate.
Do you remember arriving at Winter Harbor and what that was like?
Yes, I do. I will never forget that night. I had maximized on my liberty, so I was strolling into NSGA Winter Harbor under the last few hours of my authorized liberty, and I had to report for duty by 0100 the next morning. And I was cutting it close to the wire, and I took a plane and flew into Bangor. And the first thing I remember when I stepped out of the plane was an overwhelming aroma of balsam fir. And I said, what could that possibly be? And it was the most wonderful smell. And I had come in about 11:30, so I had to get a taxi cab and come down to Winter Harbor, and we kept passing all these bodies of water as we were getting closer. And I thought, my goodness, where are we? Because I couldn't see anything. It was so dark out except the moonlight shining on occasional bodies of water that we were passing by. And there was very few buildings or anything that I saw on the way, so I really thought, I'm going out to the edge of nowhere. And when I woke up the next day, I found out I was right.
Were you married or single when you arrived?
I was single.
Are you married now?
No, I'm divorced.
Did you marry a local man?
Yes, I did. And we had 5 children together.
So how did you meet him?
I met him, I don't recall exactly how. Oh, I met him through a friend of mine.
So how did people entertain themselves on the base?
There was a lot. They tried to do a lot of things with the people. They had a recreation department, and they had hobbies. A lot of people worked on ceramics and stuff like that. But for those of us that did not have a driver's license, which I did not at the time, we truly were sort of stuck here. And they had the club, and they had MWR, which had they had cabins and boating, and they had a lot of things for us to do. But then they had the schooner club, and a lot of us spent a good deal of time there.
You mentioned MWR. Can you tell me what that stands for?
Morale, Welfare, and Recreation.
Did you re-enlist or get promoted while stationed at Winter Harbor?
When I was at Winter Harbor, I did get promoted to 2nd class bosun's mate, and then when my time was up, I joined the reserves, and I was then stationed up in Bangor, Maine for about 15 years. But towards the end of my career, I ended up getting stationed back here, as well as after my career was over, I was also working as a civilian in a civilian position here.
What did you personally do when not on duty?
I spent a lot of time with friends, and back in the day, I used to like to sew a lot and work on arts and crafts and things. And there was always something going on. You could always find somebody to do something with. It was such a wonderful, almost like a family environment here.
What were the surrounding towns like when you were stationed at Winter Harbor?
I don't think they've really changed a whole lot. You've got Winter Harbor and Grindstone, of course, and that's where Fitz-Dixon lived, but he's passed now. And he was a wonderful contributor to the community, to the Maine Coast Memorial Hospital and things. and Gouldsboro, which is the town that I live in, and Ellsworth. I spend a lot of time in Ellsworth and even Bangor now.
Did you do any sightseeing in Maine while stationed at Winter Harbor?
Well, I didn't have a driver's license, so it was difficult. There was a few excursions I was able to get out on, but there's still a lot of Maine that I have not seen yet.
Do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events that occurred during your time at Winter Harbor?
Well, we had a chief warrant officer. When I was stationed here, I was working at the barracks. And we had a chief warrant officer named Warrant Officer Dunkel, Pat Dunkel. He was a really, really good man. And during the initiation of my supervisor, his name was Tom Mannies, and he was a cook, but he had made chief. And he was instructed at the time that he had to carry, and he was a cook, which is an MS rating, so he had to carry around a big cook's paddle named Uncle Dunkel the whole time he was going through initiation. There was a lot of fun things like that happened, and we would occasionally have our parties in the barracks, and those were always a good time, and everybody was always just really enjoying themselves and each other's company.
Do you remember anything else about the barracks or the food served at the galley?
I think the galley always did an impeccable job in serving people, and at a small command, they probably have a little better control over, their budget and their numbers of people that they served. And occasionally we would have really special meals. Once in a while we would have surf and turf, which was a great treat. And as far as the barracks goes, there was a lovely gal named Lane Weir, and she retired as a Master Chief from this command. And she painted a beautiful mural in the barracks. And I also had painted a few murals in the common area, the common lounge downstairs in the barracks. And at the time, we had won the Admiral Zumwalt Award for small facilities for the barracks. So we were all really proud of that.
Were you active in intramural sports on the base?
No, I wasn't. But they did have them here.
Which sports did they have?
I think they had football and softball, and I'm not sure if it was just softball or if they had baseball as well. And I think probably basketball in the gym, because they had a wonderful gym at the time. I don't know if it's still here or not.
What did you think of the people you served with at Winter Harbor?
For the most part, they were wonderful, wonderful people. And it was really true, and it was not just the active duty personnel, it was the civilian population here as well, which really made this base such a special place to be, because it really truly was like a big family.
Did you see a lot of civilian activity around the base or in the base?
Oh, constantly, all the time. The civilians made things happen, and they were good at what they did, and they took care of business, and it was great. It was a wonderful commingling of active duty and civilian personnel.
Tell me about the quality of the officer and enlisted leadership.
My experience that I had here with the particular people that I worked under and for, they were wonderful. I worked my first boss was a man named Jim Bosch, Chief Bosch, and he was such a nice man, and he had a beautiful family that I would occasionally babysit for them. And also, I had already mentioned MS Tom Mannies, and he taught me how to drive. So, everybody kind of looked out for everybody else. And I really miss that at times.
Did you make many friends?
Oh yes, and many of them I still have today.
Tell me about them.
Well, I have a very good friend named B.J. Sherman, and she worked in the galley for many years. She also worked at the schooner club for many years. And we're so close that we call each other sister.
What was the primary mission of the base when you were stationed here?
I'm not sure of the exact mission statement, but it had something to do with communication, and the reason that this site was chose was because of the vast, unobstructed ocean from here to the other continents. And it was about communication.
Do you feel the base was successful in accomplishing this mission during the time you were stationed there?
Oh yes, but there's so much information that we were not privy to unless we had a top secret clearance, and at the time I did not have a top secret clearance. I had a secret clearance, and I think even though the base is obsolete, I'm not sure what can be discussed about that, even to this day.
Where were you assigned for duty while stationed at Winter Harbor?
My primary job was I was the assistant manager at the barracks, and for collateral duty I stood phone operator watch. We were also trained as firefighters and also at the gate guard, as a gate guard.
Were you ever a watchstander?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Well, we would have to do shifts, watch stand in the switchboard, because all the telephone system used to be switchboard. That was really kind of fun. But it was just this little cubby office, and you know, you just handle the telephone system and patch people through to one another, and that was different shifts.
Who was the commanding officer while you were stationed at Winter Harbor?
Ooh. I do remember Commander Stevens was here when I was here, but I was here so many different times. There was a number of them, and I don't recall all their names at this time, but Commander Stevens was the one that was here when I was first stationed here.
Do you remember the years you were stationed here?
Yes, I showed up on July 15th of 1981, and I transferred into the reserves in August of 1984.
What are your worst memories of your time at Winter Harbor?
Putting the flag up in sub-zero temperatures and your fingers felt like they were going to snap right off. When we had to stand at attention out there and wait for 5 minutes, and 5 minutes felt like an eternity when the wind was below zero. That's about the worst memory.
And your fondest memories?
All the people that were so important to this command and to each other. The people.
Did you receive any special awards or decorations while you were assigned to Winter Harbor?
Well, throughout my career, I received 3 Naval Achievement Medals, a Meritorious Unit Commendation Medal, but that was at my time when I was recalled to Desert Storm. I was in the first unit in the country to go to Desert Storm, but that was when I was as a reservist. So I can't recall at what times I received my awards.
And you were stationed in the barracks while living at the base?
Yes, I lived in the barracks, but then when the barracks reached maximum capacity and I had some seniority, I was offered the opportunity to live out on the community, which I did, and I moved in with a friend of mine. We got an apartment over in Winter Harbor, a trailer.
Were you active in the civilian community while stationed at Winter Harbor? And if so, how were you involved?
Just through friendships, through making friends. I didn't really volunteer per se in the community.
So when you were living outside of the base, you would come to the base every morning?
Yes.
What was entering into the base like?
We had stickers on our vehicles to identify that we were military. So it wasn't, it was just pretty routine, and people would recognize you, the people that were on duty, and you just salute them or whatever and head on in. Unless colors was going on, then you had to wait.
And what was colors?
Colors is when you put the flag up in the morning, they refer to the flag as colors. And then when they take it down at sunset.
So you weren't permitted to enter the base during the...
It was more of a, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for. It was a courtesy. It was like military decorum. It was a courtesy just to wait because it didn't take long to wait when the colors were being run up the flagpole. And because there was music playing over the loudspeaker for the colors, so it was a thing of respect, to show respect for the colors being run up the flagpole.
Do you remember the music that would have played?
I don't remember the specific music, but it was the same music every day.
Do you recall any national news events that headlined during your time at Winter Harbor?
When I came back to Winter Harbor and I was here as a civilian, I was on my job one day when Master Chief Weir and I were watching the television, and we saw everything on the Twin Towers. It was 911, and that was a terrible day for this country and a terrible day for this command and everybody in uniform and all of America. And that's where I was that day that happened, and I was witnessing it as the news was unfolding on television. It was terrible.
What was the reaction throughout the base to the news?
I think everybody was in shock. The nation was in shock. The world was probably in shock.
What were your primary concerns and motivations as a Navy person during the time you spent at Winter Harbor?
I feel that I had a good work ethic, and it was important to me to do the best job that I could do. And, I think it would have been the same if I had been a civilian. But I really wanted to put my best foot forward and hope for advancement. But I was working in a job that was a collateral duty to my actual rating. My rating is a seagoing rating, and at the time women were rotated from a sea to a shore rotation. And when my previous command had been Rosie Roads, Puerto Rico, and that was considered sea duty. And when I was there, I worked on 65 and 85-foot torpedo retrieving boats as a deck seaman. So it was my job to go out on the boat and use a steel cable and actually lasso torpedoes that they had fired for practice. And that was a great job. It was a fun job. But it really wasn't all-encompassing to teach me my rating, which is bosun mate, and the bosun mate takes care of everything shipboard from bow to stern, from port to starboard. They take care of everything. They're supposed to know everything going on that ship. So I never really got to go to sea on big ships. So when the rotation time came up, I actually had orders in my hand to serve at the London Embassy for embassy duty. But because I had advanced a pay grade and made rate to bosun's mate, the Navy said, well, we don't need you in London anymore. So we're going to give you 5 places to choose from: Cuba, Greece, Hawaii, Annapolis, Maryland, and NSGA, Winter Harbor, Maine. And I was a young kid. I was 19 years old. I was homesick. So I thought, I wasn't even looking at a map or anything. I mean, I knew the proximity, but I didn't know which command would have been closer to my hometown. So it was a toss-up between Annapolis, Maryland, and NSGA, Winter Harbor, Maine, and I chose Maine, and that's the end of that story.
How did being stationed at Winter Harbor affect your life?
I met some great people, and I still know many of them. I married a local man. I had 5 wonderful children. The marriage didn't last, but if I hadn't have come here, I never would have had my children, or not the same children. And who knows how life could have turned out differently, but I guess I don't have that chance to find out now. It is what it is.
How do you feel about what the Schoodic Institute has done with the base and its facilities?
I'm so thrilled that the government was able to find an agency that would come in and take over this wonderful spot, this beautiful, you can't find many places as beautiful as this area, and this beautiful old building. So I really need to get more up to speed on what all the programs that they're offering, but I think it's so wonderful that they're still utilizing this property for something and it's serving the community well.
Is there anything else you would like to add that we have not covered in this interview?
I'd just like to reiterate that this small command, I think that's what made the biggest difference, that this command was relatively small. I don't know what the maximum complement of personnel was over the years. Maybe 400, I don't know, civilian and military combined. But I think, to me, that made all the difference in the world, because coming from a much larger command, you really felt sort of lost in the sauce. But here you could make a difference, and you mattered, and everybody knew everybody else. And I have a lot of great memories about NSGA Winter Harbor.
Lastly, I want to thank you for your time and your service.
Thank you, Jasper. I'd do it again in a minute.